nice to see familiar faces, or at least familiar screen names, joining us today, including Amelia Karraker, who some of you may know. Some of you have been on her dissertation committee and known her quite a bit longer than I have. Amelia
Master's
Karraker.
Committee, Eric.
What's that?
Or Master's Committee.
Or Master's Committee. All right. Amelia is a program officer at NIA with an ever-expanding portfolio of very cool projects. Amelia did her doctoral work here at the University of Wisconsin. She's kind of done it all. She was a doctoral student here. She was then a postdoc at Michigan, right? And then had a faculty job for a period of time, and then came into the federal government as a program officer at the National Institute on Aging. So for those of you who are doctoral students and have an opportunity to chat with her either today, or you can always reach out to her. She's easy to find. She really has done a bit of it all and is a wonderful resource for you, whatever your career stage or your trajectory. And so, Amelia, thanks so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing what's going on at NIA. And I'll also say, please feel free to interrupt as we go along. Amelia is happy to take questions. I will be monitoring the chat. So if Amelia doesn't see something there, I will call it out.
All right, so Eric, should I just go ahead?
All yours.
Let me see if I can do this. How's that look? Great, okay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
All right, yeah, and folks, please interrupt me. I am so happy to be here. This is really your time and what's useful for you. But I'm Amelia Karraker, and it's nice to be back in Madison, remotely at least. I was tempted to include a map of my apartment on the isthmus, but refrained. So like Eric said, I'm a program official at the National Institute on Aging in the Division of Behavioral and Social Research, where most of the aging and life course demography at the National Institute of Aging happens. I'm also the point person for the Demography 30 centers, which I think is how I, and the PO for for CDHA, which I think is how I wrangled this invitation. So in case anybody has to leave in 2 minutes, I just want to start with what I really think the takeaways are of what I'm going to share today. The first is that the National Institute on Aging supports genetic, biological, clinical, behavioral, social, and economic research on aging. And I really want to emphasize the gerund there of aging, including the life course. So it's not a question of you have to be this old to ride the NIH roller, the NIA carousel. It's really an emphasis of particularly in BSR and the life course. We at NIH more broadly have a variety of resources available online to help investigators, potential applicants stay informed. This includes information on funding opportunity announcements. Anytime you apply to NIH, you're applying to a specific funding opportunity announcement, or FOA. There's a lot of alphabet soup at NIH. You can find information on applications that are funded. You can find information on funding lines for some institutes like NIA. I'll share ours right now, or in a few minutes. Funding priorities, grants policy, ongoing exciting events, etc. So there's really a wealth of information. And by funding applications, I actually mean there are examples of full redacted applications that you can look at. And as a PO, I would say, especially for some of the more complex activity codes like a KO1, a KO award, looking at an actual application and seeing all the mechanics can be really valuable. My third bottom line upfront point is that Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease related dementias, or AD/ADRD, is a major area of scientific and fiscal growth for our institute. And lastly, program officials or program officers or other nomenclature like that, people like me can provide advice on the funding process from pre-application all the way through post-award. So where is NIA headed? Here are a few particular clues, and I shared these slides with Eric, and I think he'll share them afterwards. They're all linked up, so you don't have enough to do. There's a lot to click through here. The first is our NIA strategic directions, and this is a public roadmap of where the National Institute on Aging is going over the next 5 years, including our scientific priorities. This doesn't only include, however, areas of research that we're interested in funding, but also areas of infrastructure development. The second, as I said, is Alzheimer's disease funding has been a major area of growth for NIA over the past several years. And one thing that we pay a lot of attention to are research implementation milestones, so tracking progress about detection, cures, and support for people living with AD and their care partners. We also have a blog inside NIA, and you follow the link, you can subscribe yourself. Every Wednesday at 12 noon, there's a new blog post that comes out. The last that I'm not going to spend too much time on is the NIH guide. And so you can subscribe to a table of contents, and every Friday you'll get a list of every funding opportunity announcement, every new policy change at NIH that comes out. So perfect for your weekend reading. I do want to focus a little bit more in depth about a few things that are specific to BSR, as well as some other information that may be useful. And the first is our BSR NACA review. So every 5 years, all of the divisions within the National Institute on Aging are reviewed by our advisory council. So if you look at your summary statement, you see a council date. That's where this council meets. And this is really, particularly for our division, a roadmap, provide some pretty strong clues about what the priorities will be for the next 5 years. And also run through these other things as well. For the interest of time, I'll just jump right in. So a few of the things from this NACA review that I really want to highlight for a social science, behavioral science, population health audience are some of these research priorities. And one of, I think, the top ones is to move beyond describing health disparities and inequities to identify mechanisms that are driving those and potential modifiable risk factors. So we're really looking beyond, don't just describe an inequity, although descriptive work is tremendously important, but understanding how those can potentially be changed. Also a focus on clarifying influences of macro social trends on aging. So this can include things like increases in educational attainment, climate change, socioeconomic inequity, et cetera. As I said at the top, the National Institute on Aging. So this is also, there's been an encouragement for us to focus on integrating life course approaches to understanding aging processes. So sort of a current example to give of this is one of the studies that I manage is the AdHealth study. They've been approved to prepare a 6-waiver data collection when the folks are approximately in their mid-40s. You may not think of the mid-40s as a National Institute on Aging study. Well, it is. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention some studies housed in Wisconsin, like the Wisconsin longitudinal study, starting in high school, age 1957, and MIDAS as well. And the next is sort of an infrastructure priority that we were instructed to focus on, and particularly reducing barriers to accessing data for research. This includes heavy emphasis on making data as shareable as possible, harmonization approaches across data collection, training in data management, et cetera. So a next place to look in terms of where the Institute is going is our federal budget. So the fiscal year 2022 budget was released, I think about a month and a half ago, a little bit about halfway through the fiscal year. Really the takeaway is funding increases across the board. So NIH as a whole is allocated about $45 billion. Of that, about 4.2 is for NIA. And this includes a base increase in both Alzheimer's disease related work as well as non-Alzheimer's disease related work. I also wanted to highlight a particular language that appeared in the budget focusing on exposome studies in ADRD, Alzheimer's disease, and related dementia. So particularly focusing on a need for a center or centers on exposome studies in Alzheimer's disease, particularly specifically directing our institute to establish research infrastructure in the form of a center or centers on exposome studies. And this is a funded mandate, so including $15 million for this effort. So the budget is a really great way for the research community, perhaps maybe a little bit buried in hundreds of pages, but a good way for the community to see sort of where the dollars are. Eric, do we have a question?
No, I just came off mute because I'm done eating. So I wanted to get off video mute.
So in particular, another place you can look to sort of inform your approach to the Institute is our Payline. So not every institute at NIH publishes their Payline. NIA does. And this is just a snapshot of the entire interim funding line policy for this fiscal year. These numbers tend to change across the fiscal year. They may become slightly more generous as the fiscal year goes on because there's less sort of uncertainty to accommodate in terms of applications. But there are a few things that 3 points that I want to sort of highlight here. Can you see my little red dot? Great. So the first thing that you'll see here is that we have a general Payline. That's work that's not relevant to Alzheimer's disease, and an Alzheimer's disease Payline. And what you'll see pretty evidently is that there's a tremendous funding advantage for work relevant to Alzheimer's disease. So the general Payline for AD research that's reviewed at the Center for Scientific Review is the 28th percentile. General Payline work is the 10th percentile. The second thing I want to highlight here is specific to a particular activity code. When I say activity code, I mean an R01 or an R21, a K01, a kangaroo, could be a P30. It's that sort of one letter, two number code that refers to a particular type of activity. And one thing that you'll see here is that looking at R01s only, there's an advantage for PIs within 10 years of their terminal degree, so early stage investigators. We see the funding line is the 15th percentile for BSIs, compared with 10th percentile for established PIs like Eric Brodsky. There's also a funding advantage for folks who may not be within 10 years of their terminal degree, but are still new investigators that have never had an R01, so 13th percentile versus the 10th percentile. So this is one of, this is a NIH-wide policy. I should know not every policy I'll talk about is across NIH, but one that's sort of targeted towards supporting early career scholars as well as folks who are new to NIH funding. And the third thing you'll see is that we have a separate Payline for non-AD applications that are large. By large, we mean $500,000 in direct costs or more in any year. So 7th percentile, for example, for established PIs for a large application versus the 10th percentile. And this is just the kind of thing that, one example of the kinds of information that we share. This is one of the things that I incorporate into my conversations with applicants and grantees. It's really important to understand our policies, understand the way things work. Part of my job is to help translate them. I also just wanted to highlight a few active funding opportunity announcements. And these are a unique, specific example of funding opportunity announcements, RFAs. And the reason why I'm mentioning them is because RFAs, why are they special? First, they have a set aside, meaning that the Institute has deemed this topic to be high enough priority that assuming we receive meritorious applications, meaning ones that are favorably reviewed by peer reviewers, we will pay in this area. Okay, so that's a major advantage, particularly if you're if you are doing work that isn't relevant to Alzheimer's disease. I just want to highlight a few of them here. One for potential economists in the room, looking at health equity and the cost of novel treatments for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Screening for cognitive impairment and decision-making, resources to promote coordination and collaboration across deeply phenotyped, longitudinal behavioral and social studies of aging, and social disconnection and suicide risk in later life. Part of why I mentioned them is because RFAs also typically have just one receipt date. So whereas if you are submitting to the general R01, you can apply, you have 3 chances to apply every year. If you're applying for an RFA, it's usually just one chance. So that's part of why I wanted to put this at the top of folks' minds. Some other FOA highlights that I'd like to mention for folks interested in global health. We're participating in a FOA on implementation research to reduce non-communicable disease burden in low and middle income countries and tribal nations during critical life stages and key transition periods. So this has the PAR, you can think of the R as standing for review. There's a special review panel that will be convened to review these applications. That may be an advantage if you're working in an area where our standing study sections may not have the diverse set of interdisciplinary expertise needed. And also, as I said, Alzheimer's disease is a major focus. We have 2 PARs, research on current topics in Alzheimer's disease and its related dementias, focused on R01. So you might think of that as sort of the, maybe one of the most basic and widely used activity codes, as well as R21. So kind of question actually I have with applicants all the time is whether they should apply for an R01 or an R21. One of the big questions here is sort of about the extent of preliminary data you have, the project period you need, the amount of money you need. Anyways, but we have some particular PARs specifically for Alzheimer's disease, as well as NOCs or notices of special interest, highlighting the Institute's interest in particular topics. So NOCs generally don't have money attached to them, but they signal to the research community, our institute is really interested in this topic. We'd love to have more applications on it. So there's NOCs out right now on health disparities in Alzheimer's disease, one on sex and gender differences, the dementia care workforce, dementia care programs and services, as well as the epidemiology of Alzheimer's disease. So if you want to get more into speculative territory, I would direct your attention to our NIA Approved Concepts. So every 3 times a year, our National Advisory Council on Aging meets. And one of the things that happens is program staff like myself bring forward ideas that could potentially be developed into a future funding opportunity announcement. So here are some that I would share that were just actually approved in our January council, so the most recent council we had. Looking at these approved concepts is a good indicator, although not complete indicator of areas of interest for the Institute, and that they might be developed into funding opportunity announcements in the near future. So you might think of this as sort of a heads up for the research community that there may be some additional funding opportunities in these areas coming down the lane. So one that my friend, colleague Elena Fazio is leading is on policy and ADRD healthcare disparities, access, utilization, and quality. I'm leading one on measures and methods for research on family caregivers for people living with AD. So thinking about how different groups define family, understand care itself, focusing on family measures for groups that are traditionally underrepresented in care research, for example, sexual and gender minorities, immigrants, lower education folks. My colleague Partha is leading one on understanding the supply of professional dementia care providers and their decisions. Another on precision medicine approaches and addressing AD minority health and disparities. broadening the scope and reach of NIA's research centers for minority aging research, the RICMAR program. The RICMAR is one of sort of the sister P30s to the demography centers, also using that same activity code, the P30. And the zestily named more mobile monitoring of cognitive change continued. I think somebody just wanted M3C3 to be in there, which is led by our deputy director. So these just give you a heads up about some activities that are coming along the way.
Amelia, a question in the chat, just clarifying the concepts that you've highlighted there are not the only concepts of interest. They're specific concepts of heightened interest, or how should we read that?
I would think of them as activities that may be, no, they're not, it's not an exhaustive list, but activities that may be further developed into specific FOAs. I would say that the majority of our business, if you can call it that, comes from investigator-initiated ideas. So there's a parent R01 funding opportunity announcement. It's not on a particular topic. It's on, everybody from someone who's doing mouse parabiosis to understanding supply and demand for home health workers can apply through that parent R01. But I would just sort of think of them as areas where there may be additional development in the near future, but not a guarantee.
Thanks, Amelia.
Yeah. So another area of to sort of see what's been happening at our institute and activities that are being developed programmatically, our upcoming meetings. So there's one in just a couple of weeks at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. There's a workshop that my colleague Frank Van Eera is leading on structural racism and rigorous models of social inequity. You can actually, I think, tune into this meeting. You don't have to be in DC. Another, as you gathered hopefully by now, Alzheimer's disease is a major focus, and it's not just about understanding the social or biological determinants of AD risk or the progression of the disease. It's also about research that supports giving people living with Alzheimer's disease and their care partners the highest quality lives that they can have for as long as possible. And this Dementia Care and Caregiving Summit, led by Elena Fazio, is one of those activities. So these just sort of give you some ideas of things that NIA has in the hopper. Some other sort of selected recent reports and workshop proceedings that highlight some of our ongoing programmatic interest. One is a meeting held last year that John Phillips, my branch chief, led on improving consent and response in longitudinal studies of aging. So anyone who's doing data collection knows that there are, the surveys are sort of bedeviled by issues regarding consent, declining consent and response rates. This meeting sort of was addressing potential strategies to remediate that. There's also a decadal survey of behavioral and social science research on AD, so really running the gamut of all of the particular types of insights that behavioral and social scientists can shed on Alzheimer's disease. A third activity that I was deeply involved in, which was a consensus study of the National Academies, focused on high and rising mortality rates among working-aged adults. So really the impetus for this was understanding, the long-standing poor standing of the United States relative to peer countries, which was itself the topic of a National Academies report several years ago, as well as understanding why life expectancy had declined in the United States in the mid-2010s. So actually one of the things that came out of this in response to the research recommendations from this report was an RFA that unfortunately is now expired, but focusing on understanding place-based health inequalities in midlife. So that's how sometimes these workshops and proceedings may be used in programmatic development, as well as the 2020 Dementia Care and Caregiving Research Summit. I think there were I just would like to share a few general tips on applying to NIA, NIH. I think a lot of these will probably apply to a lot of different institutes. Not sure what the audience of this meeting is exactly, but the first is that as much as we like to say it doesn't, grantsmanship matters. When you're writing an application, you want to be clear and coherent. You want to do things that might seem gimmicky, like bolding sections of the application that correspond to the criteria that the reviewers are asked to review you on. Really, you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to follow what it is that you're doing. You want to lead them along and have them thinking exactly what it is that you want them to think, not when the next episode of their favorite HBO Max show is coming on. A colleague of mine said that he recommends that people imagine that the reviewers read 10 applications before they got to theirs, and that they're cranky and tired and hungry, which sounds like a children's story, but is maybe a good strategy in terms of how you approach what you're writing. I know people spend months on these applications, but if your application is reviewed, here's a sobering thought, and it's discussed, the reviewers may spend 10 minutes on it. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to see what is exciting, what is rigorous, what is innovative, why you're the right team, and why you have the right environment. It's also important to be honest about the weaknesses of your work. Acknowledging them actually shows your sophistication. I mean, one thing that I share with a lot of applicants is, there's no perfect data set, but a question that you can help reviewers answer is, why is your data set the right data for the scientific questions that you're asking? It's also important to be upfront because reviewers are picky, and they will find whatever those shortcomings are. And what you can do is propose strategies to address those. Another major point that I want to raise is that secondary data analyses are funded all the time, including for R01. So I think a popular misconception is that for an R01, you need to be doing some sort of primary data collection. You need to be doing something that's, $499,000 a year for 5 years. They don't all have to be that big, and this is one of the things that as a program official I can help people with is thinking about what's the right activity code for the work that they really want to do. If I was to sort of sum up a lot of my interactions with applicants, it's you come up with the exciting science, and I will help you figure out the best ways to get that science achieved through NIH processes or advise you on the best processes. Some more general application tips. R01s have a higher standard in terms of expectations of preliminary data, power analyses. Preliminary data can take various forms. It could be that you published in this area before with this data. That's very helpful. That your team has worked together successfully before. You show the cell sizes for the specific measures that you're proposing to use to show that you have adequate statistical power to identify statistically meaningful effects in relationships you're proposing to study. I would say, though, that even if you're not writing an R01, you want to do everything you possibly can to convince the reviewers that you're going to be successful. So just because you're not writing an R01, if you have a power analysis for your R21 to show, you're doing some sort of two-stage least squares, show the first stage. Give reviewers every confidence that you're going to be successful. Write the most rigorous, innovative, and high-impact application that you can. It's true that you want to speak to the interests of the Institute, or NIA. This is part of why it's helpful to talk with a program official. But I'm not a reviewer, and I think there's some people on this call maybe who have been reviewers. But they don't talk about, whether this is, whether this is an idea that NIA is going to like, or NICHD is going to like. generally, actually, a lot of the stuff that I put in my portfolio, a lot of different, substantive or institutes are represented in those study sections. The questions that they're really asking is this rigorous? Is it innovative? Are you asking an important scientific question? And actually, I would say that's sort of the place to start. Think about the answer to the question, does this application address an important scientific question or problem? This is, I think of approximately corresponding to the review criterion of significance. If you're not asking an important problem, game over, okay? There's sort of no why proceed further. But then the second one, generally a lot of people who are applying, they pass that bar. And that's sort of an approach question. Will the data, the methods, the measures that you're proposing use a rigorous answer to this question? An approach in terms of RO1s, RO3s, R21s, that's generally the 4 driving criteria. And this is where things like showing preliminary data, if you're using 2 data sets, you show and you're doing some sort of parallel analysis, showing how they're harmonized with one another or how they fit together. There's really almost no such thing as too much information in terms of the approach section. I think this might actually be even my last slide. And then I just had, I have another one. I have a few sort of comments about the specific aims page. If you interact with the program official, probably we're going to ask you to share a draft of your specific aims page. And again, one of the things that's really nice about all the resources available online is you can see examples of specific aims pages. These should outline the application significance, hypotheses, data, methods at a high level. And forgive my psychology colleagues if they're on the line, it's sort of the gestalt of what you propose to do. It's like the best complete picture of what this science is about. And for many of the reviewers, this may be the only part of your application that they look at. So it's important to get it right. There's no magic number of aims in terms of your specific aims page. It should be appropriate for the activity code. I've seen R01 applications that have 1 aim. I've seen R01 applications that have 7 aims. I probably wouldn't recommend 7 for most folks, but it should really be appropriate for, again, what is the activity code designed to do? How much money are you asking for and how long is the project period? And really sort of a piece of advice that I try and fail to integrate into every aspect of my own life is to do less better. It's far preferable to have 2 good, really strong aims than 3 so-so aims. It's so heartbreaking in a review where the reviewers love aims 1 and 2, and aim 3 is just a dud, and it will bring the whole application down. When the reviewer reads the specific aims page, again, I'm sort of channeling a reviewer. I'm not a reviewer myself. You want them to be thinking about exactly what you want them to think about, if that makes sense. Not about what they're going to have for dinner or that their kid is screaming downstairs, exactly about your science. If you use a particular term, make sure that the reviewers that you have may not be in the same field as you specifically. So being really clear to lead them along into what you want them to think. I think this is my last slide. When to talk to a program official or project officer, basically the same thing. When you're preparing to submit or have a great idea, but you want broad feedback, is this something the Institute is interested in? Maybe you're not sure what to submit to. Remember, every application comes to a specific funding opportunity announcement. Maybe you're not even sure if it's an R01 or it's an R21 size project. That's the kind of conversation I have a lot, actually. Where should this be reviewed? What study section? Because I'm not a reviewer, but I listen to a lot of reviews. I may be able to advise on particular things that reviewers may tend to pick up on. Although I would say across study sections, the approach comes up again and again and again. Also, if you're submitting a large application, so $500,000 direct costs or more in any year, you need advance permission from the Institute, so you need to work through a program officer. One of the things that is most useful for me is to send a draft of your specific aims up front. everybody knows that it's not polished and it's not final. That's why we're talking about it. But for me, it's really helpful because it can help me sort of do my research to think about maybe the appropriate places for it. Maybe also find a different program official is more appropriate to link up with them. If you don't provide it, somebody's probably going to ask you for it anyways. It can also be helpful to talk to a PO after your summary statement is issued, so after the review has taken place. And then hopefully in the best case scenario, you're funded and you are giving your program official updates on great publications that have come up, committees that you're serving on, opportunities for administrative or diversity supplements, and maybe even a competing renewal. So I deliberately sort of kept it kind of short because I'm pretty tired and these Zoom meetings can be a little intense, but really the rest of the time is for everybody else and whatever I can do to be helpful and elaborate on some more topics.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Amelia. This was super helpful. And I'm glad it was recorded because I will seek to get all, particularly new investigators on those last slides. I think that's enormously helpful to be explicit about the things that you've seen and that you find are more beneficial to applications and things to avoid. We have plenty of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat. You can put your hand up or just come off mute and ask. Dr. Fletcher.
Thanks, Amelia, for that great discussion and presentation. My question is about thinking back on your own history here at UW, going to a faculty job, going to the NIH. Do you have thoughts on how current PhD students could, think about those different options to them? And like another way of saying are there things you wish you would have done in graduate school here at UW that might have been helpful for either of those two jobs that you've had?
That's a great question. Thanks. Well, first off, I would have eaten at Sophia's even more than I already did because I hear that it's closed down and gone for more runs along the Lake Shore, which I also did all the time in the middle of the day. But I guess I would say I never imagined that a job like being a program official was something that people even did. I guess what I would say is it seems like there's more of a recognition that there are a variety of sort of alt academic jobs that are available to folks. I mean, I would say that I use my PhD every single day, but I don't actually do research myself anymore. I mean, I'd encourage anybody who's interested in, alt academic jobs to, I'm happy to be a resource for absolutely anybody because I've been the recipient of so much wonderful mentoring throughout my career, including at UW. I mean, I would say that publishing will never hurt you. Developing strong methodological chops is never going to hurt you at all. One of the things about being a PO that's particularly rewarding for me is sort of being able to be a little bit more omnivorous maybe than on the tenure track. So thinking about a variety of interesting questions, and one of the things that's really exciting as a PO is sort of being positioned to influence the shape of the field, albeit potentially in small ways. And I'll give you a specific example of what I mean. If certain questions aren't asked in surveys, or certain questions are, that shapes the kinds of scientific questions that the research community can ask. And as a program official, you're uniquely positioned to have those conversations with PIs of large studies, to think about what are sort of the barriers in terms of moving the field forward in a big direction. So for example, there's been this big push, as I mentioned, in terms of data transparency, research rigor and reproducibility, and NIH is sort of, as the holder of a large purse, an ability to act on that. Jason, I don't know if that answered your question at all.
It was very helpful. I wonder if either some reactions of some of your mentors that maybe you want to pay forward to the mentees here, or a very narrow question of whether you have specific thoughts about graduate students doing a lot, a little, or zero grant application work while they're graduate students.
Again, I mean, I think that was something that it's ironic given where I am now, but I was completely oblivious to a lot of the funding opportunities for folks at a predoctoral level, despite being a beneficiary of a T32, both as a predoc and as a postdoc. I would encourage folks to think creatively. Again, I think, you know, in academia, I think it's still probably true that external funding is the coin of the realm. You know, I'd be happy actually to come back and do another presentation, for example, on K-award applications, F31 individual fellowships at the pre and postdoc level. There was something else you said that I guess another thing I would say is that it's your life. I was in a tenure track job at Iowa State, but I also wanted to be asking sort of bigger questions rather than focused on the minutia of my own research. No one lives their life but you, and I think it can be tricky to find sort of what else is out there. But I encourage folks to be proactive and to use their networks. I think of the people I used to room with at PAA. I think only one of us is in academia, which is wonderful. But there's just a lot of options out there that can give you the life that you want to live. Maybe you want to live in a particular place. That's okay. And there's a way to sort of get where you want to be.
Steph.
So I don't know if you can answer this or not, Amelia, but are there any topics that you've been disappointed that NIA has not been as excited to fund? So people putting some things forward that you think are pretty exciting for aging, and it just doesn't fly, whether it's the reviewers or what? Are there some things you've been disappointed about?
That's a great question. And actually the RFAs are one of the opportunities to address some of those issues. I feel like it's terrible to share RFAs that are already closed. But one that we led, that I developed and led in the last year or so, was on data enhancements and analyses to clarify the relationship between Alzheimer's disease and education. So basically the idea that, education is related to Alzheimer's disease, but understanding to the extent to which that is causal, why is there heterogeneity in the size of that effect? What could you actually do from a policy perspective to address that? I was annoyed that everybody was just asking about years of education or highest degree earned, which is really important for some things, but maybe not for everything. So one of the responses I had as a program officer and went to we have an internal process for this, was to say, we need to have data enhancements that actually focus on these alternative measures of what education is, education as a social environment, education as a force for stratification. You gotta get a big hook and cut me off because I'm gonna keep going. But RFAs are one of the ways that as a program we respond to some of these issues, and actually having a special review can be really important, especially for topics that may not review so well. So an example of that would be methods and measurement kind of work, which benefits the entire field. Is it super exciting? Does it review particularly well? Not always. And that might make it a particular candidate for example, for an RFA. I should say that this differs a lot by institute. I imagine a lot of folks Also do business with NICHD, which we love. We want to see good work funded wherever the right home for it is. And sometimes that's what I do is say, you should talk to NICHD or you should talk to a different institute about this topic. I think, as a federal entity, we're always sort of moving, responding to the sort of the winds as they change. And that's just, a part of being part of this organization. I will say, I shouldn't say this. I think people often think that program officials have more power than they do. It sort of depends on the institute. But at NIA, we generally fund right down the line. But we do, because we take our peer review exceptionally seriously. And folks on this call have been reviewers, and I thank you so much for what you do, because it's the bedrock of the entire NIH process. But I don't know, staff, if that gives you some handle. Yes, we're frustrated sometimes, and then we try to do things about it. And sometimes as a PO, you might really fight hard for an application. We do have discretionary funding, a very small pool of discretionary funding, and sometimes that enables us to fund things out of order, high priority topics that might just not have reviewed particularly well. As much as the review process is essential, we also recognize that it's imperfect.
Nicole.
Hey, Amelia, thanks so much for this talk. It's great to have you. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of social scientists approaching the National Institutes of Health, right? So I think part of the reason why it's sometimes hard for both students and faculty in the social sciences to figure out kind of how to speak the grant language to the reviewers is the perception that that NIH is focusing on health often from a medical perspective. And I think that as I've interacted more with NIH, I realized that there are things like BSR, right, and review panels that include a lot of social scientists. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts for folks who are here thinking, I'm training as a sociologist or as an economist or as a policy scholar. What are some things that people like that should think about, as they prepare grants for NIH?
Well, first off, please apply, and please come to us. It's our job. Sometimes people apologize for asking for a call. Meeting with applicants is my favorite part of my job. I love talking with people about their research. I love hopefully helping them, and having them go off and assemble that super complex MS study, whatever it is that they're doing. We need diverse social science. We need diversity in a variety of aspects of the biomedical enterprise. We fund a lot of social scientists. You can actually take a look at NIH Reporter and see that we're well represented. Another thing I would say is it is very difficult to get solely qualitative work funded, but some of the work that really makes my heart sing, which comes from a background in sociology, is the richness that mixed methods work can shed on the content and the meaning of various social processes. I guess I'd say that we're really here to help. There are particular, when you apply to NIH, depending on the FOA, but usually your application will be assigned to a study section. And a lot of the social science portfolios across institutes goes to SSPS. So it's comprised of, as you know, demographers, sociologists, psychologists, public policy people. We need your methods and we need your expertise. So I guess those are some general kind of anodyne remarks.
Thank you.
So there's a question in the chat. I have a question. It seems that NIA is very supportive to studies on cognitive functioning and dementia. Yes. How about other health outcomes such as physical functioning, chronic diseases, pain, I would add. We really conceptualize health broadly. Every application does have to have a public health significance statement. But I do want to underscore, despite the fact that there's been a lot of growth and there's a huge emphasis on Alzheimer's disease, we absolutely want your applications on multimorbidity, on disability, on functional health, all of these sorts of topics. I don't know if there was like a specific outcome that folks were interested in. We're not just NIA, we're not just Alzheimer's disease, I guess is what I would say.
Sort of on a related point, Amelia, how do you think about the boundaries of what goes into that Alzheimer's disease portfolio?
That's a great question. And there's actually one of the reasons I would suggest that you subscribe to our blog is because this is one of the topics that we post on from time to time. I mean, I guess one thing I would say, particularly for CDHA and actually NICHD and other people, however you define yourselves, is regarding Alzheimer's disease, we know that it's really like a life course condition. We know that early life, including some work that's come out of Wisconsin, the kinds of conditions that you grow up in as a child matter. The social relationships that you have, the kinds of school and educational experiences you have matter, right, Eric? Alzheimer's disease is really a life course process. And I guess going back to your comment, we call needing a life course approach to thinking about aging. I imagine a lot of folks at Wisconsin, besides WLS and MIDAS, are familiar with studies like HRS, other studies that are, under development or developed there that you can use as a platform for asking a lot of cutting edge questions. I actually did want to return to Michal, something that you said about like what's advice for social scientists, and one of the things about why it's particularly important for social scientists right now is because I think we should have been at a crossroads a long time ago, but now strike while the iron is hot regarding issues of health inequity. And we really need social scientist perspectives on how to measure structural racism, how to think about intersectionality, how that informs how things that we know about the way that families and people live their lives. It should inform the sampling strategies that we use for our studies. So I guess I would just sort of circle back to that as another thing that I think social scientists really can bring to the table and need to bring to the table.
Quick follow-up on the what goes in the AD bucket question. If people are thinking about life course approaches, even if you think about, early educational opportunities and such, when you think about pitching a project, do you need to say, and the outcome is AD diagnosis or mortality from Alzheimer's disease? What are the bounds on what you can think about in terms of outcomes?
Thank you. Thanks for the follow-up. I think it's important to be clear about how the work that you're doing is relevant to Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease related dementias. So we know, especially even in our largest data infrastructure investment, the health and retirement study, we're moving towards biomarkers of AD risk, but we're not quite there yet. And this can include things like the slide I showed a little while ago about how to monitor cognitive change, how to develop measures that are sensitive enough to employ in real-world settings that capture meaningful variation in people's cognitive function over time. I think the way I would think about it is be able to clearly, and talk to a PO, but be able to clearly articulate how the work that you're doing is relevant for Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't mean you have to have autopsies. I remember at PAA, maybe almost a decade ago, this question about what is a representative brain. That's actually another place where demographers and others can come in, sort of the incredible selection of the samples in some of these studies. Just, it just makes you want to wave your hands around and run around. So I guess maybe that's a start to that, Eric. But again, I'll just point to the fact, the AdHealth study, the members of that study are in their 40s, and we're supporting them as an AD project right now. So again, thinking about those life course pathways, what are the precursors to Alzheimer's disease that we see much earlier in life, and that we see alarmingly more frequently in more recent cohorts, and in particular groups within cohorts. So things like vascular function, hypertension, diabetes. These are risk factors for cognitive decline later in life. So I would think about it really expansively. Again, it requires that kind of perspective, and again, that life course approach.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. There really is more space than one would necessarily anticipate by narrowly reading AD. And that's certainly, I mean, just as an example, the work, some of the work that NIA has funded that falls under Amelia that I'm doing is related to mild cognitive impairment, right? Which is not Alzheimer's disease, but is related to this pathway to Alzheimer's disease. So I think that's very useful to think about it more broadly. Do folks have other questions for Amelia? I want to go back to something, and if you have other questions, raise your hand, put them in the chat. There was something that I wanted to go back to, actually to Jason's question. What do you find most engaging in your work as a program official, and what do you find most frustrating?
I love talking with applicants. I love talking with people about their ideas, especially folks who are early stage in their careers. Again, just myself being a beneficiary of a tremendous amount of generosity from a variety of places, including a lot at Madison, people that might have appeared on a committee or not. It's just something that I really, really love to do. I'm sort of an omnivore. And this is, being a program official is kind of a great job for that. I'm trying to think of some of the things that I know. One of the things that ESR has been engaged with over the last couple of years, that's been led by John Phillips, is impacts of COVID on health, broadly construed, sort of unanticipated consequences of maybe policies that are health policies, but influences on health. One of the things I learned yesterday, a couple of days ago, was about, I think maybe somewhat encouraging. I'm always looking for silver linings with COVID, but suicide behavior actually doesn't seem like it increased during COVID. Something that's not sort of specifically, the ability to sort of make these connections, connect somebody with a mentor that can help them get some really good training on a topic, and then seeing them get funded. I think that's one of the things I really love. I think sometimes it's frustrating because there's so much good work that we just, you saw our funding line, it's the 10th percentile. There's so much good work that's awesome, it just doesn't get funded. And that's hard, and we can advocate really hard for particular projects, but it's a problem of scarcity. I think another thing is the turnaround, and this sort of goes along with the advice for folks who are new to applying. Best case scenario for getting funded is you apply, you would expect your notice of award, which is when your funding is official, probably 9 months after you apply. That is like the speed at which our organization typically operates. And that can be frustrating because you can see, especially with, various current events, that we need to move faster. We do have some tools for responding more quickly, and actually some of this COVID work is an example. But I think also for me, you feel there's a lot of meaning in being part of a mission that you believe in. Being part of something bigger than yourself, creating resources that help the community at large. Particularly regarding the mission of NIA. I'll just use the language of generativity, thinking about the privilege, really the luck of growing old, and doing work that supports enabling that for as many people as possible to live the best lives they can for as long as they can. I have pictures of my grandparents in my office, and I think about them all the time. My work here. So I'll end on a positive, on that positive. But it's a bureaucracy and red paper. So
Look at the University of Wisconsin, I would say I live vapor to some degree, yeah. Steph Robert has a helpful question in the chat. Can you say a little more about K Awards and any specific tips you might have there?
I would love to, and maybe I should have included more slides on that. So for folks who don't know, I think of like the K is like, it's like career. Like K is for career awards, and they're a series of different K applications, but typically folks are talking about, especially for folks who are early in their career, there are different Ks for different career stages, but a K99 ROO, which some people call a kangaroo, the K99 being a postdoctoral stage, the ROO being, actually, I know somebody in there, followed school, Lauren Schmitz has a kangaroo, and she's in the ROO phase, I think, right now, as well as a K01. So typically that's what folks are talking about. And the reason you write those in particular is because there are skills that you need to write that RO1 that you really want to write. If you can write the RO1 now, you already have the training, there's no need to do a K, just go for the RO1. And some people will say, oh, I've never applied to NIH before, I shouldn't apply for an RO1. My attitude is sort of like, if you've got the skills and you've got the expertise, like go for it. Especially if you're early stage and you're an investigator, because you just saw the Payline, it's a little bit better. And that's only true for RO1s. But regarding the K, so it's about these skills. And I sort of think of it as like this triangle. It's about a training plan, it's about a research plan, and it's about your mentors. So these are all sort of, vertices of that triangle. And you want them to sort of lockstep move together. So maybe it's, you have a data set that you're very popular. You can imagine right now is maybe you're an HRS user that you've never worked with HCAP, which is the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol. You want to become a population health AD researcher. So you work with HRS already. You want to incorporate some of the cognitive measures and sort of build on your existing portfolio. What is the training that you need for that? Maybe it's that say you're at Wisconsin, you're going to attend a series of coursework. You're going to, I should have used a Wisconsin example, it could be less. You're going to shadow Mihal and Sanjay Asthana to learn about, the sort of, richness of some of the measures there and how to measure cognitive function in a data set like that. You have mentors who are funded by NIH and have a record of successful mentoring. It's really those pieces falling all together. So the training supports the research, the mentors support the research is how you're able to engage the training. It's sort of like, I think of it as like you have training wheels and like, you know, your caregiver is like gradually loosening them as the K goes on, you know, they're really, really loose, and then you're ready to write that R01 application in your fourth or fifth year. It's sort of a little hard to tell, but a lot of the questions I have with people are, you know, about like the research aims, but what's the training plan going to look like? You know, be really specific about the training plan. The stronger those mentorship letters can be, and not just, you know, this is the best thing, this person's the best thing since sliced bread, but this is the way I'm going to talk to them. You know, I write a letter that actually shows that I know what's going on in this award as opposed to some boilerplate thing. Those are particular things that I think might be helpful, but really it's that integration of the training, the research, and the mentorship, that those all mutually enforce one another. Some people even create this sort of like massive table that shows their training aims, their research aims, and their mentorship across the 4 or 5 years of the entire award. You know, this is what I'm doing this semester. I'm meeting with Nihal, you know, once a week at the terrace. You know, Eric and I are going to meet like, I don't know, every other month, you know, for some reason. Another thing I'd say about the K is that, again, another silver lining about COVID is I think reviewers are really amenable to the idea that you can be mentored by somebody who isn't at the same institution as you. The catch is you have to be really, really specific about how you're going to interact with them. That's one of those sort of patterns I see as a PO. Like, it's not clear, like I mean specific. Like, I am going to Zoom with staff, you know, every other week. These are the deliverables. This is the training plan I have to make sure I'm meeting my training goals. I'm going to spend the summer in Madison with her and, you know, learn all about neighborhoods or whatever, like, you know, be that specific. So those are a few things I would say. Another thing is, it's hard because there are a couple of examples of K applications online. I think actually NIA just put a K99 ROO up. If you have successful examples of applications, take a look at them. In a way, I think that the K applications are harder than an R01, just because of the number of moving parts. You have like a candidate statement, you have a training plan, you have a research plan. It's like just the number of things that need to be integrated together is just a lot. So I think whenever you have, you know, examples that you can work with, to take advantage of your mentors and your colleagues. You know, but as I said, you know, maybe in your review, this stands for Ks, but others as well. Maybe the reviewers for your, you know, demography of AD application are other demographers. But the whole panel is probably not going to be demographers. It's probably going to be, could be some biologists, it could be neuroscientists, it could be geriatrics, geriatricians, and clinical gerontologists. You know, you actually want to make sure whatever your application is, that it has a little bit of like a broader appeal based on, you know, the study section you're going to. One thing also, Steph, I'd say about Ks at NIA, and this is different than NICHD. At NICHD, the Ks are reviewed in standing study sections, so like SSPS. At NIA, we have our own review branch, and our review branch handles the review of Ks based on activity codes. So it's still external peer review, but the center of that, you know, NIA has its own SROs that review. And so all of the K99 ROOs are reviewed together, you know, so whether you're writing about, you know, an enhancement of the future elderly model, or, you know, what's something that's happening with yeast, if it's a K99 ROO, they're all reviewed together. And I think in general, it's a relatively recent change. And I think it's generally worked pretty well, but I would just say, again, focusing on the mechanics and making it really easy for people to see, you know, that you're going to be successful, and that your training and your mentorship and your research sort of fall together.
That is super helpful. Thank you, Amelia. Ching.
Hi, Amelia. Thank you so much for your amazing talk, and it's great to see folks here at Wisconsin. I had a question about the early career reviewer program. So this is a more logistical question. I applied last year. I submitted a K. I still haven't really heard anything, so I don't know if there's more to it other than just waiting to be selected to be an early career reviewer, just to get exposure to what it's like to be on a review panel. Thank you.
That's a great question, and I think it's awesome that you're being proactive. I do think that I don't know how much the early career reviewer process is actually used by scientific review officers. I'll just say for the study sections that I work with, the reviewers are all people generally who have R01 level funding. I would say, taking a look at, actually, one thing I'll drop in the chat, I didn't include it because all just closed for this year, but a plug for next year actually is the Butler-Williams Scholars Program. And one of the things that is really special about this program, I actually did this before I sort of came over to the other side. I can tell you as a program official, they do a mock review as part of the Butler-Williams program. The whole program is awesome. But a mock review where you like pretend to be reviewers and you have a little study section. This was like the most like sobering, and it was like an accurate reflection actually of how a review happens. And I think there's sort of some more resources in terms of, I think the more your instincts are right on, the more you can internalize the way that a reviewer, and assume like they're all lovely, but like assume that they're cranky and hungry. Like, I can tell, like if you saw an application with an instrumental variable approach, like you're going to pick at that instrument. Like get yourself in that mindset if that's your application. But the Butler-Williams program does this sort of mock review. Maybe even at Wisconsin, you guys could set up your own little mock review. I know there are some folks who have experience on study section and folks who have been on study section. I don't know. Please check me if I'm not characterizing something about the reviewer mindset. That's sort of I think it's great that you reached out. Typically, I think unless you have an R01 level, you probably aren't going to get asked, but that's awesome that you got a K. Applying is the first part. I mean, the other thing I would say is you don't see, even like you don't see people's failures, you only see their successes. I wish people could see, and we can't discuss applications that aren't funded, but like, you just have to keep at it. Don't be discouraged. I know that's easier to say from where I go where I'm sitting, but that's really honestly, I think, like the key to success.
Thank you.
I never heard of this Butler-Williams thing. It looks awesome. I will try to remember to suggest it. All right. Any other questions for Amelia? All right. Well, then please join me in thanking Amelia for joining us today. I know some of you will have meetings with her later. Amelia, thanks so much for joining us from Bethesda.
My pleasure. Like I said,
hopefully next time in person.
Yeah, next time at the terrace.
There you go.
Exactly. It was nice to see you. Thanks for spending time with us.
My pleasure, Steph. Good to see you too.